ROBIN HOOD by J. Walker McSpadden. Chapter 1. How Robin Hood became an Outlaw. List and hearken, gentlemen, that be of free-born blood. I shall tell you of a good yeoman, his name was Robin Hood. Robin was a proud outlaw, well as he walked on the ground. So courteous an outlaw as he was one, was never none else found. In the days of good King Harry the Second of England, he of the warring sons, there were certain forests in the north country set aside for the king's hunting, and no man might shoot deer therein under penalty of death. These forests were guarded by the king's foresters, the chief of whom, in each wood, was no mean man, but equal in authority to the sheriff in his walled town, or even to my lord bishop in his abbey. One of the greatest of royal preserves was Sherwood and Barnesdale Forest, near the two towns of Nottingham and Barnesdale. Here for some years dwelt one Hugh Fitzooth as head forester, with his good wife and son Robert. The boy had been born in Locksley Town, in the year 1160, stern records say, and was often called Locksley, or Rob of Locksley. He was a comely, well-knit stripling, and as soon as he was strong enough to walk, his chief delight was to go with his father into the forest. As soon as his right arm received thew and sinew, he learned to draw the long bow and speed a true arrow. While on winter evenings his greatest joy was to hear his father tell of bold Will o' th' Green, the outlaw, who for many summers defied the king's foresters and feasted with his men upon king's deer. And on other stormy days the boy learned to whittle out a straight shaft for the long bow and tip it with gray goose feathers. The fond mother sighed when she saw the boy's face light up at these woodland tales. She was of gentle birth, and had hoped to see her son famous at court or abbey. She taught him to read and to write, to doff his cap without awkwardness, and to answer directly and truthfully both lord and peasant. But the boy, although he took kindly to these lessons of breeding, was yet happiest when he had his beloved bow in hand and strolled at will, listening to the murmur of the trees. Two playmates had Rob in these gladsome early days. One was Will Gamewell, his father's brother's son, who lived at Gamewell Lodge, hard by Nottingham town. The other was Marion Fitzwalter, the only child of the Earl of Huntingdon. The castle of Huntingdon could be seen from the top of one of the tall trees in Sherwood, and on more than one bright day Rob's white signal from this tree told Marion that he awaited her there. For you must know that Rob did not visit her at the castle. His father and her father were enemies. Some people whispered that Hugh Fitzooth was the rightful Earl of Huntingdon, but that he had been defrauded out of his lands by Fitzwalter, who had won the king's favor by a crusade to the Holy Land. But little cared Rob or Marion for this enmity, however it had arisen. They knew that the great green wood was open to them and that the wide, wide world was full of the scent of flowers and the song of birds. Days of youth speed all too swiftly, and troubled skies come all too soon. Rob's father had two other enemies besides Fitzwalter, in the persons of the lean Sheriff of Nottingham and the fat Bishop of Hereford. These three enemies one day got possession of the king's ear, and whispered therein to such good, or evil, purpose that Hugh Fitzooth was removed from his post of king's forester. He and his wife and Rob, then a youth of 19, were descended upon during a cold winter's evening, and dispossessed without warning. The sheriff arrested the forester for treason, of which, poor man, he was as guiltless as you or I, and carried him to Nottingham jail. Rob and his mother were sheltered overnight in the jail also, but next morning were roughly bade to go about their business. Thereupon they turned for succor to their only kinsman, Squire George of Gamewell, who sheltered them in all kindness. But the shock and the winter's night's journey proved too much for Dame Fitzooth. She had not been strong for some time before leaving the forest. In less than 2 months she was no more. Rob felt as though his heart was broken at this loss. But scarcely had the first spring flowers begun to blossom upon her grave when he met another crushing blow in the loss of his father. That stern man had died in prison before his accusers could agree upon the charges by which he was to be brought to trial. 2 years passed by. Rob's cousin Will was away at school, and Marion's father, who had learned of her friendship with Rob, had sent his daughter to the court of Queen Eleanor. So these years were lonely ones to the orphaned lad. The bluff old squire was kind to him, but secretly could make nothing of one who went about brooding and as though seeking for something he had lost. The truth is that Rob missed his old life in the forest no less than his mother's gentleness and his father's companionship. Every time he twanged the string of the longbow against his shoulder and heard the gray goose shafts sing, it told him of happy days that he could not recall. One morning as Rob came in to breakfast, his uncle greeted him with, "I have news for you, Rob, my lad," and the hearty old squire finished his draught of ale and set his pewter tankard down with a crash. "What may that be, Uncle Gamewell?" asked the young man. "Here is a chance to exercise your good longbow and win a pretty prize. The fair is on at Nottingham, and the sheriff proclaims an archers' tournament. The best fellows are to have places with the king's foresters, and the one who shoots straightest of all will win for prize a golden arrow. A useless bauble enough, but just the thing for your lady love, eh, Rob, my boy?" Here the squire laughed and whacked the table again with his tankard. Rob's eyes sparkled. "'Twere indeed worth shooting for, uncle mine," he said. "I should dearly love to let fly arrow alongside another man, and a place among the foresters is what I have long desired. Will you let me try?" "To be sure," rejoined his uncle. "Well I know that your good mother would have had me make a clerk of you, but well I see that the greenwood is where you will pass your days. So here's luck to you in the bout," and the huge tankard came a third time into play. The young man thanked his uncle for his good wishes, and set about making preparations for the journey. He traveled lightly, but his yew bow must needs have a new string, and his cloth-yard arrows must be of the straightest and soundest. One fine morning, a few days after, Rob might have been seen passing by way of Locksley, through Sherwood Forest to Nottingham town. Briskly walked he, and gaily, for his hopes were high, and never an enemy had he in the wide world. But 'twas the very last morning in his life when he was to lack an enemy. For as he went his way through Sherwood, whistling a blithe tune, he came suddenly upon a group of foresters, making merry beneath the spreading branches of an oak tree. They had a huge meat pie before them, and were washing down prodigious slices of it with nut brown ale. One glance at the leader, and Rob knew at once that he had found an enemy. 'Twas the man who had usurped his father's place as head forester, and who had roughly turned his mother out in the snow. But never a word said he for good or bad, and would have passed on his way, had not this man, clearing his throat with a huge gulp, bellowed out, "By my troth, here is a pretty little archer. Where go you, my lad, with that two-penny bow and toy arrows? Belike he would shoot at Nottingham fair. Ho, ho!" A roar of laughter greeted this sally. Rob flushed, for he was mightily proud of his shooting. "My bow is as good as yours," he retorted, "and my shafts will carry as straight and as far. So I'll not take lessons of any of ye." They laughed again loudly at this, and the leader said with frown, "Show us some of your skill, and if you can hit the mark here's 20 silver pennies for you. But if you hit it not, you are in for a sound drubbing for your pertness." "Pick your own target," quoth Rob in a fine rage. "I'll lay my head against that purse that I can hit it." "It shall be as you say," retorted the forester angrily. "Your head for your sauciness that you hit not my target." Now at a little rise in the wood a herd of deer came grazing by, distance full 50 yards. They were king's deer, but at that distance seemed safe from any harm. The head forester pointed to them. "If your young arm could speed a shaft for half that distance, I'd shoot with you." "Done!" cried Rob. "My head against 20 pennies I'll cause yon fine fellow in the lead of them to breathe his last." And without more ado he tried the string of his longbow, placed a shaft thereon, and drew it to his ear. A moment, and the quivering string sang death as the shaft whistled across the glade. Another moment, and the leader of the herd leaped high in his tracks and fell prone, dyeing the sward with his heart's blood. A murmur of amazement swept through the foresters, and then a growl of rage. He that had wagered was angriest of all. "Know what you have done, rash youth?" he said. "You have killed a king's deer, and by the laws of King Harry your head remains forfeit. Talk not to me of pennies, but get ye gone straight, and let me not look upon your face again." Rob's blood boiled within him, and he uttered a rash speech. "I have looked upon your face once too often already, my fine forester. 'Tis you who wear my father's shoes." And with this he turned upon his heel and strode away. The forester heard his parting thrust with an oath. Red with rage he seized his bow, strung an arrow, and without warning launched it full aft Rob. Well was it for the latter that the forester's foot turned on a twig at the critical instant, for as it was the arrow whizzed by his ear so close as to take a stray strand of his hair with it. Rob turned upon his assailant, now 20 yards away. "Ha!" said he, "you shoot not so straight as I, for all your bravado. Take this from the twopenny bow." Straight flew his answering shaft. The head forester gave one cry, then fell face downward and lay still. His life had avenged Rob's father, but the son was outlawed. Forward he ran through the forest, before the band could gather their scattered wits. Still forward into the great greenwood. The swaying trees seemed to open their arms to the wanderer and to welcome him home. Toward the close of the same day, Rob paused hungry and weary at the cottage of a poor widow who dwelt upon the outskirts of the forest. Now this widow had often greeted him kindly in his boyhood days, giving him to eat and drink. So he boldly entered her door. The old dame was right glad to see him, and baked him cakes in the ashes, and had him rest and tell her his story. Then she shook her head. "'Tis an evil wind that blows through Sherwood," she said. "The poor are despoiled and the rich ride over their bodies. My 3 sons have been outlawed for shooting king's deer to keep us from starving, and now hide in the wood. And they tell me that 20 of as good men as ever drew bow are in hiding with them." "Where are they, good mother?" cried Rob. "By my faith, I will join them." "Nay, nay," replied the old woman at first, but when she saw that there was no other way, she said, "My sons will visit me tonight. Stay you here and see them if you must." So Rob stayed willingly to see the widow's sons that night, for they were men after his own heart. And when they found that his mood was with them, they made him swear an oath of fealty, and told him the haunt of the band, a place he knew right well. Finally one of them said, "But the band lacks a leader, one who can use his head as well as his hand. So we have agreed that he who has skill enough to go to Nottingham, an outlaw, and win the prize at archery, shall be our chief." Rob sprang to his feet. "Said in good time," cried he, "for I had started to that self same fair, and all the foresters and all the sheriff's men in Christendom shall not stand between me and the centre of their target." And though he was but barely grown, he stood so straight and his eye flashed with such fire that the 3 brothers seized his hand and shouted, "A Locksley! A Locksley! If you win the golden arrow you shall be chief of outlaws in Sherwood Forest." So Rob fell to planning how he could disguise himself to go to Nottingham town, for he knew that the foresters had even then set a price on his head in the marketplace. It was even as Rob had surmised. The Sheriff of Nottingham posted a reward of £200 for the capture, dead or alive, of one Robert Fitzooth, outlaw. And the crowds thronging the streets upon that busy fair day often paused to read the notice and talk together about the death of the head forester. But what with wrestling bouts and bouts with quarterstaves and wandering minstrels, there came up so many other things to talk about that the reward was forgotten for the nonce, and only the foresters and sheriff's men watched the gates with diligence, the sheriff indeed spurring them to effort by offers of largesse. His hatred of the father had descended to the son. The great event of the day came in the afternoon. It was the archers' contest for the golden arrow, and 20 men stepped forth to shoot. Among them was a beggarman, a sorry-looking fellow with leggings of different colors, and brown scratched face and hands. Over a tawny shock of hair he had a hood drawn, much like that of a monk. Slowly he limped to his place in the line, while the mob shouted in derision. But the contest was open to all comers, so no man said him nay. Side by side with Rob, for it was he, stood a muscular fellow of swarthy visage and with one eye hid by a green bandage. Him also the crowd jeered, but he passed them by with indifference while he tried his bow with practised hand. A great crowd had assembled in the amphitheatre enclosing the lists. All the gentry and populace of the surrounding country were gathered there in eager expectancy. The central box contained the lean but pompous sheriff, his bejewelled wife, and their daughter, a supercilious young woman enough, who, it was openly hinted, was hoping to receive the golden arrow from the victor, and thus be crowned queen of the day. Next to the sheriff's box was one occupied by the fat Bishop of Hereford, while in the other side was a box wherein sat a girl whose dark hair, dark eyes, and fair features caused Rob's heart to leap. 'Twas Maid Marian. She had come up for a visit from the Queen's Court at London town, and now sat demurely by her father, the Earl of Huntingdon. If Rob had been grimly resolved to win the arrow before, the sight of her sweet face multiplied his determination an hundredfold. He felt his muscles tightening into bands of steel, tense and true. Yet withal his heart would throb, making him quake in a most unaccountable way. Then the trumpet sounded, and the crowd became silent, while the herald announced the terms of the contests. The lists were open to all comers. The first target was to be placed at 30 ells distance, and all those who hit its center were allowed to shoot at the second target, placed 10 ells farther off. The third target was to be removed yet farther, until the winner was proved. The winner was to receive the golden arrow and a place with the King's foresters. He it was also who crowned the queen of the day. The trumpet sounded again, and the archers prepared to shoot. Rob looked to his string, while the crowd smiled and whispered at the odd figure he cut, with his vari-colored legs and little cape, but as the first man shot they grew silent. The target was not so far but that 12 out of the 20 contestants reached its inner circle. Rob shot sixth in the line and landed fairly, being rewarded by an approving grunt from the man with the green blinder, who shot seventh, and with apparent carelessness, yet true to the bull's-eye. The mob cheered and yelled themselves hoarse at even this marksmanship. The trumpet sounded again, and a new target was set up at 40 ells. The first 3 archers again struck true, amid the loud applause of the onlookers, for they were general favorites and expected to win. Indeed, 'twas whispered that each was backed by one of the 3 dignitaries of the day. The fourth and fifth archers barely grazed the center. Rob fitted his arrow quietly, and with some confidence sped it unerringly toward the shining circle. "The beggar! The beggar!" yelled the crowd. "Another bull for the beggar!" In truth, his shaft was nearer the center than any of the others. But it was not so near that Blinder, as the mob had promptly christened his neighbor, did not place his shaft just within the mark. Again the crowd cheered wildly. Such shooting as this was not seen every day in Nottingham town. The other archers in this round were disconcerted by the preceding shots, or unable to keep the pace. They missed one after another and dropped moodily back, while the trumpet sounded for the third round, and the target was set up 50 ells distant. "By my halidom, you draw a good bow, young mister," said Rob's queer comrade to him in the interval allowed for rest. "Do you wish me to shoot first on this trial?" "Nay," said Rob, "but you are a good fellow by this token, and if I win not, I hope you may keep the prize from yon strutters." And he nodded scornfully to the 3 other archers who were surrounded by their admirers, and were being made much of by retainers of the sheriff, the bishop, and the earl. From them his eye wandered toward Maid Marian's booth. She had been watching him, it seemed, for their eyes met. Then hers were hastily averted. Blinder's quick eye followed those of Rob. "A fair maid, that," he said smilingly, "and one more worthy the golden arrow than the sheriff's haughtiness." Rob looked at him swiftly and saw naught but kindliness in his glance. "You are a shrewd fellow, and I like you well," was his only comment. Now the archers prepared to shoot again, each with some little care. The target seemed hardly larger than the inner ring had looked at the first trial. The first 3 sped their shafts, and while they were fair shots, they did not more than graze the inner circle. Rob took his stand with some misgiving. Some flecking clouds overhead made the light uncertain, and a handful of wind frolicked across the range in a way quite disturbing to a bowman's nerves. His eyes wandered for a brief moment to the box wherein sat the dark-eyed girl. His heart leaped. She met his glance and smiled at him reassuringly, and in that moment he felt that she knew him despite his disguise and looked to him to keep the honor of old Sherwood. He drew his bow firmly, and taking advantage of a momentary lull in the breeze, launched the arrow straight and true, singing across the range to the center of the target. "The beggar! The beggar! A bull! A bull!" yelled the fickle mob, who from jeering him were now his warm friends. "Can you beat that, Blinder?" The last archer smiled scornfully and made ready. He drew his bow with ease and grace, and without seeming to study the course, released the winged arrow. Forward it leaped toward the target, and all eyes followed its flight. A loud uproar broke forth when it alighted just without the center and grazing the shaft sent by Rob. The stranger made a gesture of surprise when his own eyes announced the result to him, but saw his error. He had not allowed for the fickle gust of wind which seized the arrow and carried it to one side. But for all that he was the first to congratulate the victor. "I hope we may shoot again," quoth he. "In truth, I care not for the golden bauble, and wish to win it in despite of the sheriff for whom I have no love. Now crown the lady of your choice." And turning suddenly, he was lost in the crowd, before Rob could utter what was upon his lips to say, that he would shoot again with him. And now the herald summoned Rob to the sheriff's box to receive the prize. "You are a curious fellow enough," said the sheriff, biting his lip coldly. "Yet you shoot well. What name go you by?" Marion sat near by and listened intently. "I am called Rob the Stroller, my lord sheriff," said the archer. Marion leaned back and smiled. "Well, Rob the Stroller, with a little attention to your skin and clothes, you would not be so bad a man," said the sheriff. "How like you the idea of entering my service?" "Rob the Stroller has ever been a free man, my lord, and desires no service." The sheriff's brow darkened, yet for the sake of his daughter and the golden arrow he dissembled. "Rob the Stroller," said he, "here is the golden arrow which has been offered to the best of archers this day. You are awarded the prize. See that you bestow it worthily." At this point the herald nudged Rob, and half inclined his head toward the sheriff's daughter, who sat with a thin smile upon her lips. But Rob heeded him not. He took the arrow and strode to the next box where sat Maid Marian. "Lady," he said, "pray accept this little pledge from a poor stroller who would devote the best shafts in his quiver to serve you." "My thanks to you, Rob in the Hood," replied she with a roguish twinkle in her eye, and she placed the gleaming arrow in her hair, while the people shouted, "The Queen! The Queen!" The sheriff glowered furiously upon this ragged archer who had refused his service, taken his prize without a word of thanks, and snubbed his daughter. He would have spoken, but his proud daughter restrained him. He called to his guard and bade them watch the beggar. But Rob had already turned swiftly, lost himself in the throng, and headed straight for the town gate. That same evening, within a forest glade, a group of men, some 20 clad in Lincoln green, sat round a fire roasting venison and making merry. Suddenly a twig crackled, and they sprang to their feet and seized their weapons. "I look for the widow's sons," a clear voice said, "and I come alone." Instantly the 3 men stepped forward. "'Tis Rob!" they cried. "Welcome to Sherwood Forest, Rob." And all the men came and greeted him, for they had heard his story. Then one of the widow's sons, stout Will, stepped forth and said, "Comrades all, ye know that our band has sadly lacked a leader, one of birth, breeding, and skill. Belike we have found that leader in this young man, and I and my brothers have told him that the band would choose that one who should bring the sheriff to shame this day and capture his golden arrow. Is it not so?" The band gave assent. Will turned to Rob. "What news bring you from Nottingham town?" asked he. Rob laughed. "In truth, I brought the sheriff to shame for my own pleasure, and won his golden arrow to boot. But as to the prize, ye must e'en take my word, for I bestowed it upon a maid." And seeing the men stood in doubt at this, he continued, But I'll gladly join your band, and you take me as a common archer, for there are others older and mayhap more skilled than I." Then stepped one forward from the rest, a tall, swarthy man, and Rob recognized him as the man with the green blinder, only this was now removed, and his freed eye gleamed as stoutly as the other one. "Rob in the Hood, for such the lady called you," said he, "I can vouch for your tale. You shamed the Sheriff e'en as I had hoped to do, and we can forego the golden arrow since it is in such fair hands. As to your shooting and mine, we must let future days decide. But here I, Will Stuteley, declare that I will serve none other chief save only you." Then good Will Stuteley told the outlaws of Rob's deeds, and gave him his hand of fealty. And the widows' sons did likewise, and the other members every one right gladly, because Will Stuteley had heretofore been the truest bow in all the company. And they toasted him in nut brown ale, and hailed him as their leader, by the name of Robin Hood. And he accepted that name because Maid Marian had said it. By the light of the campfire the band exchanged signs and passwords. They gave Robin Hood a horn upon which he was to blow to summon them. They swore also that while they might take money and goods from the unjust rich, they would aid and befriend the poor and the helpless, and that they would harm no woman, be she maid, wife, or widow. They swore all this with solemn oaths, while they feasted about the ruddy blaze under the greenwood tree. And that is how Robin Hood became an outlaw. So ends chapter 1. How Robin Hood met Little John. "Oh, here is my hand," the stranger replied. "I'll serve you with all my heart. My name is John Little, a man of good mettle. Ne'er doubt me, for I'll play my part." "His name shall be altered," quoth William stoutly, "and I will his godfather be. Prepare then a feast, and none of the least, for we will be merry," quoth he. All that summer Robin Hood and his merry men roamed in Sherwood Forest, and the fame of their deeds ran abroad in the land. The Sheriff of Nottingham waxed wroth at the report, but all his traps and excursions failed to catch the outlaws. The poor people began by fearing them, but when they found that the men in Lincoln Green who answered Robin Hood's horn meant them no harm, but despoiled the oppressor to relieve the oppressed, they gan to have great liking for them. And the band increased by other stout hearts till by the end of the summer 80 good men and true had sworn fealty. But the days of quiet which came on grew irksome to Robin's adventurous spirit. Up rose he one gay morn, and slung his quiver over his shoulders. "This fresh breeze stirs the blood, my lads," quoth he, "and I would be seen what a gay world looks like in the direction of Nottingham town. But tarry ye behind in the borders of the forest, within earshot of my bugle call." Thus saying, he strode merrily forward to the edge of the wood, and paused there a moment, his agile form erect, his brown locks flowing, and his brown eyes watching the road, and a goodly sight he made, as the wind blew the ruddy color into his cheeks. The highway led clear in the direction of the town, and thither he boldly directed his steps. But at a bend in the road he knew of a bypath leading across a brook which made the way nearer and less open, into which he turned. As he approached the stream, he saw that it had become swollen by recent rains into quite a pretty torrent. The log footbridge was still there, but at this end of it a puddle intervened which could be crossed only with a leap, if you would not get your feet wet. But Robin cared little for such a handicap. Taking a running start, his nimble legs carried him easily over and balanced neatly upon the end of the broad log. But he was no sooner started across than he saw a tall stranger coming from the other side. Thereupon Robin quickened his pace, and the stranger did likewise, each thinking to cross first. Midway they met, and neither would yield an inch. "Give way, fellow!" roared Robin, whose leadership of a band, I am afraid, had not tended to mend his manners. The stranger smiled. He was almost a head taller than the other. "Nay," he retorted, "fair and softly. I give way only to a better man than myself." "Give way, I say," repeated Robin, "or I shall have to show you a better man." His opponent budged not an inch, but laughed loudly. "Now, by my halidome," he said good naturedly, "I would not move after hearing that speech. even if minded to it before, for this better man I have sought my life long. Therefore show him to me, an it please you." "That will I right soon," quoth Robin. "Stay you here a little while, till I cut me a cudgel like unto that you have been twiddling in your fingers." So saying, he sought his own bank again with a leap, laid aside his long bow and arrows, and cut him a stout staff of oak, straight, knotless, and a good 6 feet in length. But still it was a full foot shorter than his opponent's. Then back came he boldly. "I mind not telling you, fellow," said he, "that a bout with archery would have been an easier way with me. But there are other tunes in England besides that the arrow sings." Here he whirled the staff about his head by way of practice. "So make you ready for the tune I am about to play upon your ribs. Have at you! 1, 2, 3!" roared the giant, smiting at him instantly. Well was it for Robin that he was quick and nimble of foot, for the blow that grazed a hair's breadth from his shoulder would have felled an ox. Nevertheless, while swerving to avoid this stroke, Robin was poising for his own, and back came he forthwith. Whack! Whack parried the other. Whack! 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 The fight waxed fast and furious. It was strength pitted against subtlety, and the match was a merry one. The mighty blows of the stranger went whistling around Robin's ducking head, while his own swift undercuts were fain to give the other an attack of indigestion. Yet each stood firmly in his place, not moving backward or forward a foot for a good half hour, nor thinking of crying enough, though some chance blow seemed likely to knock one or the other off the narrow footbridge. The giant's face was getting red, and his breath came snorting forth like a bull's. He stepped forward with a furious onslaught to finish this audacious fellow. Robin dodged his blows lightly, then sprang in swiftly and unexpectedly and dealt the stranger such a blow upon the short ribs that you would have sworn the tanner was trimming down his hides for market. The stranger reeled and came within an ace of falling, but regained his footing right quickly. "By my life, you can hit hard," he gasped forth, giving back a blow almost while he was yet staggering. This blow was a lucky one. It caught Robin off his guard. His stick had rested a moment while he looked to see the giant topple into the water, when down came the other upon his head. Whack! Robin saw more stars in that one moment than all the astronomers have since discovered, and forthwith he dropped neatly into the stream. The cool rushing current quickly brought him to his senses. Howbeit he was still so dazed that he groped blindly for the swaying reeds to pull himself up on the bank. His assailant could not forbear laughing heartily at his plight, but was also quick to lend his aid. He thrust down his long staff to Robin, crying, "Lay hold of that, and your fist whirl not so much as your head." Robin laid hold and was hauled to dry land for all the world like a fish, except that the fish would never have come forth so wet and dripping. He lay upon the warm bank for a space to regain his senses. Then he sat up and gravely rubbed his pate. "By all the saints," said he, "you hit full stoutly. My head hums like a hive of bees on a summer morning." Then he seized his horn, which lay near, and blew thereon 3 shrill notes that echoed against the trees. A moment of silence ensued, and then was heard the rustling of leaves and crackling of twigs like the coming of many men, and forth from the glade burst a score or two of stalwart yeomen, all clad in Lincoln green like Robin, with good Will Stuteley and the widow's 3 sons at their head. "Good master," cried Will Stuteley, "how is this? In sooth there is not a dry thread on your body." "Why, marry," replied Robin, "this fellow would not let me pass the footbridge, and when I tickled him in the ribs, he must needs answer by a pat on the head which landed me overboard." "Then shall he taste some of his own porridge," quoth Will. "Seize him, lads." "Nay, let him go free," said Robin. "The fight was a fair one, and I abide by it. I surmise you also are quits?" he continued, turning to the stranger with a twinkling eye. "I am content," said the other, "for verily you now have the best end of the cudgel. Wherefore I like you well, and would fain know your name." "Why," said Robin, "my men and even the Sheriff of Nottingham know me as Robin Hood, the outlaw." "Then I am right sorry that I beat you," exclaimed the man, "for I was on my way to seek you, and to try to join your merry company. But after my unmannerly use of the cudgel, I fear we are still strangers." "Nay, never say it," cried Robin. "I am glad I fell in with you, though sooth to say I did all the falling." And amid a general laugh the two men clasped hands, and in that clasp the strong friendship of a lifetime was begun. "But you have not yet told us your name," said Robin, bethinking himself. "Whence I came, men call me John Little." "Enter our company, then, John Little, enter and welcome. The rites are few, the fee is large. We ask your whole mind and body and heart, even unto death." "I give you the bond, upon my life," said the tall man. Thereupon Will Stuteley, who loved a good jest, spoke up and said, "The infant in our household must be christened, and I'll stand godfather. This fair little stranger is so small of bone and sinew that his old name is not to the purpose." Here he paused long enough to fill a horn in the stream. "Hark ye, my son," standing on tiptoe to splash the water on the giant, "take your new name on entering the forest. I christen you Little John." At this jest the men roared long and loud. "Give him a bow and find a full sheath of arrows for Little John," said Robin joyfully. "Can you shoot as well as you fence with the staff, my friend?" "I have hit an ash twig at 40 yards," said Little John. Thus chatting pleasantly the band turned back into the woodland and sought their secluded dell, where the trees were the thickest, the moss was the softest, and a secret path led to a cave, at once a retreat and a stronghold. Here, under a mighty oak, they found the rest of the band, some of whom had come in with a brace of fat does. And here they built a ruddy fire and sat down to the meat and ale, Robin Hood in the center, with Will Stuteley on the one hand and Little John on the other. And Robin was right well pleased with the day's adventure, even though he had got a drubbing. For sore ribs and heads will heal, and 'tis not every day that one can find a recruit as stout of bone and true of soul as Little John. So ends Chapter 2. Chapter 3. How Robin Hood turned butcher and entered the Sheriff's service. "The butcher," he answered jolly Robin, "no matter where I do dwell, for a butcher am I, and to Nottingham am I going my flesh to sell." The next morning the weather had turned ill, and Robin Hood's band stayed close to their dry and friendly cave. The third day brought a diversion in the shape of a trap by a roving party of the Sheriff's men. A fine stag had been struck down by one of Will Stuteley's fellows, and he and others had stepped forth from the covert to seize it, when 20 bowmen from Nottingham appeared at the end of the glade. Down dropped Will's men on all fours, barely in time to hear a shower of arrows whistle above their heads. Then from behind the friendly trees they sent back such a welcome that the Sheriff's men deemed it prudent not to tarry in their steps. 2 of them, in sooth, bore back unpleasant wounds in their shoulders from the encounter. When they returned to town the Sheriff waxed red with rage. "What!" he gasped. "Do my men fear to fight this Robin Hood face to face? Would that I could get him within my reach once. We should see then, we should see." What it was the Sheriff would see he did not state, but he was to have his wish granted in short space, and you and I will see how he profited by it. The 4th day, and the one following this friendly bout, Little John was missing. One of his men said that he saw him talking with a beggar, but did not know whither they had gone. 2 more days passed. Robin grew uneasy. He did not doubt the faith of Little John, but he was fearful lest a roving band of foresters had captured him. At last Robin could not remain quiet. Up sprang he, with bow and arrows and a short sword at his side. "I must away to Nottingham town, my men," he cried. "The goodly Sheriff has long desired to see me, and mayhap he can tell me tidings of the best quarterstaff in the shire," meaning Little John. Others of the band besought him to let them go with him, but he would not. "Nay," he said smilingly, "the Sheriff and I are too good friends to put doubt upon our meeting. But tarry ye in the edge of the wood opposite the west gate of the town, and ye may be of service ere tomorrow night." So saying he strode forward to the road leading to Nottingham, and stood as before looking up and down to see if the way was clear. Back at a bend in the road he heard a rumbling and a lumbering, when up drove a stout butcher, whistling gaily, and driving a mare that sped slowly enough because of the weight of meat with which the cart was loaded. "A good morrow to you, friend," hailed Robin. "Whence come you, and where go you with your load of meat?" "A good morrow to you," returned the butcher, civilly enough. "No matter where I dwell, I am but a simple butcher, and to Nottingham am I going, my flesh to sell. 'Tis fair week, and my beef and mutton should fetch a fair penny," and he laughed loudly at his jest. "But whence come you?" "A yeoman am I, from Locksley Town. Men call me Robin Hood." "The saints forfend that you should treat me ill," said the butcher in terror. "Oft have I heard of you, and how you lighten the purses of fat priests and knights. But I am naught but a poor butcher, selling this load of meat, perchance for enough to pay my quarter's rent." "Rest you, my friend, rest you," quoth Robin. "Not so much as a silver penny would I take from you, for I love an honest Saxon face and a fair name with my neighbors. But I would strike a bargain with you." Here he took from his girdle a well-filled purse, and continued: "I would fain be a butcher, this day, and sell meat at Nottingham town. Could you sell me your meat, your cart, your mare, and your good will, without loss, for 5 marks?" "Heaven bless ye, good Robin," cried the butcher right joyfully. "That can I." And he leaped down forthwith from the cart, and handed Robin the reins in exchange for the purse. "One moment more," laughed Robin. "We must e'en change garments for the nonce. Take mine and scurry home quickly, lest the King's foresters try to put a hole through this Lincoln green." So saying, he donned the butcher's blouse and apron, and climbing into the cart drove merrily down the road to the town. When he came to Nottingham, he greeted the scowling gatekeeper blithely and proceeded to the marketplace. Boldly he led his shuffling horse to the place where the butchers had their stalls. He had no notion for the price to ask for his meat, but put on a foolish and simple air as he called aloud his wares. "Hark ye, lasses and dames, hark ye! Good meat, come buy, come buy. 3 pen'orths go for 1 penny, and a kiss is good, say I." Now when the folk found what a simple butcher he was, they crowded around his cart, for he really did sell 3 times as much for 1 penny as was sold by the other butchers. And 1 or 2 serving lasses with twinkling eyes liked his comely face so well that they willingly gave boot of a kiss. But the other butchers were wroth when they found how he was taking their trade, and they accordingly put their heads together. One said, "He is a prodigal, and has sold his father's land, and this is his first venture in trading." Another said, "He is a thief, who has murdered a butcher and stolen his horse and meat." Robin heard these sayings, but only laughed merrily and sang his song the louder. His good humor made the people laugh also, and crowd round his cart closely, shouting uproariously when some buxom lass submitted to be kissed. Then the butchers saw that they must meet craft with craft, and they said to him, "Come, brother butcher, if you would sell meat with us, you must e'en join our guild and stand by the rules of our trade." "We dine at the Sheriff's mansion to-day," said another, "and you must take one of our party." "Accurst of his heart," said jolly Robin, "that a butcher will deny. I'll go with you, my brethren true, and as fast as I can hie." Whereupon, having sold all his meat, he left his horse and cart in charge of a friendly hostler, and prepared to follow his mates to the mansion house. It was the Sheriff's custom to dine various guilds of the trade from time to time, on fair days, for he got a pretty profit out of the fees they paid him for the right to trade in the marketplace. The Sheriff was already come with great pomp into the banqueting room, when Robin and 3 or 4 butchers entered, and he greeted them all with great condescension. And presently the whole of a large company was seated at a table, groaning beneath the good cheer of the feast. Now the Sheriff bade Robin sit by his right hand, at the head of the board, for 1 or 2 butchers had whispered to the official, "That fellow is a right mad blade, who yet made us much sport to-day. He sold more meat for 1 penny than we could sell for 3, and he gave extra weight to whatsoever lass would buss him." And others said, "He is some prodigal who knows not the value of goods, and may be plucked by a shrewd man right closely." The Sheriff was will to pluck a prodigal with the next man, and he was moreover glad to have a guest who promised to enliven the feast. So, as I have told you, he placed Robin by his side, and he made much of him and laughed boisterously at his jests. Though, sooth to say, the laugh were come by easily, for Robin had never been in merrier mood, and his quips and jests soon put the whole table at a roar. Then my Lord Bishop of Hereford came in, last of all, to say a ponderous grace and take his seat on the other side of the Sheriff, the prelate's fat body showing up in goodly contrast to the other's lean bones. After grace was said, and while the servants clattered in with the meat platters, Robin stood up and said, "And amen say I to my Lord Bishop's thanks. How now, my fine fellows, be merry and drink deep, for the shot I'll pay ere I go my way, though it cost me £5 and more. So, my lords and gentlemen all, spare not the wine, but fall to lustily." "Hear, hear!" shouted the butchers. "Now are you a right jolly soul," quoth the Sheriff, "but this feast is mine own. Howbeit you must have many a head of horned beasts, and many an acre of broad land, to spend from your purse so freely." "Ay, that have I," returned Robin, his eyes all a twinkle. 500 horned beasts have I and my brothers, and none of them have we been able to sell. This is why I have turned butcher. But I know not the trade, and would gladly sell the whole herd, an I could find a buyer." At this the Sheriff's greed 'gan to rise. Since this fool would be plucked, thought he, why should not he do the plucking? 500 beasts, say you? He queried sharply. 510 fat beasts by actual count, that I would sell for a just figure. Ay, to him who will pay me in right money would I sell them for 20 pieces of gold. Is that too much to ask, lording? Was there ever such an idiot butcher, thought the Sheriff, and he so far forgot his dignity as to nudge the bishop in his fat ribs. "Nay, good fellow," quoth he chuckling, "I am always ready to help any in my shire, and you cannot find a buyer for your herd at this just figure, I will e'en buy them myself." At this generosity Robin was quite overcome, and fell to praising the Sheriff to the skies, and telling him that he should not have cause to forget the kindness. "Tut, tut," said the Sheriff, "'tis naught but a trade. Drive in your herd tomorrow to the market-place, and you shall have money down." "Nay, excellence," said Robin, "that can I not easily do, for they are grazing in scattered fashion. But they are over near Gamewell, not more than a mile therefrom at most. Will you not come and choose your own beasts tomorrow?" "Ay, that I will," said the Sheriff, his cupidity casting his caution to the winds. "Tarry with me overnight, and I will go with you in the morning." This was a poser for Robin, since he liked not the idea of staying overnight at the Sheriff's house. He had hoped to appoint a meeting place for the other, but now saw that this might excite doubt. He looked around at the company. By this time, you must know, the feast had progressed far, and the butchers were deep in their cups. The Sheriff and Robin had talked in a low voice, and my Lord Bishop was almost asleep. "Agreed," said Robin presently, and the words were no sooner out of his mouth than the door opened and a serving man entered bearing tray of mulled wine. At sight of the fellow's face, Robin gave an involuntary start of surprise, which was instantly checked. The other also saw him, stood still a moment, and as if forgetting something, turned about and left the hall. It was Little John. A dozen questions flashed across Robin's mind, and he could find answer for none of them. What was Little John doing in the Sheriff's house? Why had he not told the band? Was he true to them? Would he betray them? But these questions of distrust were dismissed from Robin's open mind as soon as they had entered. He knew that Little John was faithful and true. He recovered his spirits and began again upon a vein of foolish banter, for the amusement of the Sheriff and his guests, all being now merry with wine. "A song!" one of them shouted, and the cry was taken up round the table. Robin mounted his chair and trolled forth. "A lass and a butcher of Nottingham agreed 'twixt them for to wed. Says he, I'll give ye the meat, fair dame, and ye will give me the bread." Then they joined in the chorus amid a pounding of cups upon the board. "With a hey and a ho and a hey nonny no, a butcher of Nottingham." While the song was at its height, Little John reappeared with other servants and refilled the cups. He came up to Robin and, as if asking him if he would have more wine, said softly, "Meet me in the pantry tonight." Robin nodded and sang loudly. The day was already far spent, and presently the company broke up with many hiccupy bows to the Sheriff and little notice of the drowsy Bishop. When the company was dispersed, the Sheriff bade a servant show Robin to his room, and promised to see him at breakfast the next day. Robin kept his word and met Little John that night, and the Sheriff next day, but Little John has been doing so much in the meantime that he must be allowed a chapter to himself. So let us turn to another story that was sung of in the ballads of olden time and find out how Little John entered the Sheriff's service. So ends chapter 3.